Everyone. So good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the City of Kenmore Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion meeting to order for Thursday, April 21st, 2022. I will now take the roll, and I'd like to ask if you could please, or the task force members could please turn on their cameras and say you're verbally present as I call your name. Darlene Ademba. Juanita Aguilar.
Present.
David Arthur. Lily Bishop.
I'm here.
Bill Castro.
Present.
Peggy Evans. Juliana Pooley. Nancy Tai.
Present.
Aisha Jallo. Marco Ballesteros, Jeannie Galloway, and Carlos Gill are excused today. And I wanted to share with the DEI task force that Sam Otis will no longer be participating as a task force member. And we will now move to public comments. It's now time for public comment, and we'd like to hear from you. If you could please raise your hand now if you'd like to speak. You will have 2 minutes to give comments. And Clerk, do we have anyone from the community who is raising their hand?
Thank you very much, Leonora. We do have one person that's showing interest, Mr. Peoples. I'm going to go ahead and project my timer, and we'd love to hear from you, so stand by. Mr. Peoples, can you hear us?
Yes, John Peoples, Kenmore.
Go
Good
ahead.
evening. Can you hear me? Good
Yes.
evening, Task Force. Thank you for allowing me to address you tonight. I hope you're all doing well. I bring you a reasonable grievance and ask you to take a very specific action to remedy the situation. I ask that the racist propaganda piece called the White Supremacy Pyramid be removed from Kenmore's municipal website. There is no justification for the city-sponsored racism. This racist piece passes opinion as fact and relies on snide insinuations and targeting a whole group of people based solely on the color of their skin and their words and those of their allies. Its defense is inherently racist, its creators and defenders racists. The piece says, say what we want you to say and believe what we want you to believe, or you contribute to and support genocide. It says, lie about history, otherwise you're evil. In other words, the city of Kenmore and its contractors support bullies and bullying behavior. The piece unfairly targets people who use reasonable language to contribute to the conversation about race relations and bullies them into staying silent under threat of being deemed evil and dehumanized. If you think this vile racist propaganda is justified, you have been tragically misinformed and you have my sincere sympathies. Only a racist would think this content is okay. It is my hope and expectation that the DEI task force ensures that the racist propaganda be removed. If you cannot grant this simple and sincere request, then you will have demonstrated your commitment to injecting and perpetuating racism where it didn't exist before. I would eagerly discuss this with any of you in person. Anyone with the courage and heart to discuss this with me, just let me know. Comment says we should be back to in-person meetings soon. Good night.
Thank you, Mr. Peoples. Good night to you.
You're welcome.
Is there anyone else that wishes to be heard? Leonora, I see no additional hands raised. I'm sorry, you're muted.
Thank you. At this point, we will move on to the approval of the minutes, which you received prior to the meeting, and I will suggest that we approve the minutes through unanimous consent. All in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, so hearing none, the minutes stand approved. Now we move to agenda items, and I will pass the mic to Shannon, and she will be sharing with you community and staff engagement. insights and recommendations.
Okay, thank you so much, Leonora. Hold on, let me just get my screen organized here. There we go. So I wanted to, as always, address the concern from public comment. And first, I'll start with what is, I want to start with what we know to be true. Diversity in terms of terminology is all of the ways that humans express difference as a species, as a population. So the definition of diversity is all of the ways that we are different as humans. Inclusion is how you leverage that diversity and that difference of insight, perspective, race, gender, ethnicity, neurodiversity, physical difference, age, and all of the ways that we are different, to bring all of those voices to the table and to leverage the very best that everyone has to offer in order to accomplish a common good. Equity means, quite simply, to build governance structures, institutions, rules, and laws that allow for equal access and opportunity to be enjoyed or to be possible for all people. So it's to identify those places within our systems that lead to disparity, lead to disparate outcome, lead to inequity, and lead to injustice, to identify those things and with deliberate intention to remove them as barriers to equal access and opportunity. And in this country, I wish that I could say that we had a different history in this country, but for more than 400 years, people with neurological difference and physical difference were called lame and feeble-minded. People that were poor did not enjoy the access to both the ballot or the juror's box or many other opportunities because of their condition in terms of poverty. People of color, specifically people that were Black and brown people, did not enjoy historically the same rights, access, and opportunity that people that were white enjoyed. Women did not for a long time enjoy the same access to inheritance, to voting, to basic civil rights that men did in this country without deliberate and intentional action. And so then given that, what is racism? What is racism? But you have to first come to conclude that, and I think that most scientists have agreed that humans haven't existed as a species long enough to have developed into subspecies, and we're part of the same race, and that's the human race. But then how do you explain more than 400 years of difference where the inherited physical characteristics, specifically the pigment of skin, has mattered so much in terms of access and opportunity? From Jamestown to the Georgetown settlement, to the colonies, to the 19th century, to the 20th century, and today, why does the pigment of someone's skin still matter in terms of access and opportunity? Not that it should, but why does it? Across every institution, across every different sector that we judge human success, why does race matter then in schools and in courts and in healthcare and in policing and in built environment and home ownership and wealth and generational wealth and all of these things? I don't think that it takes much research to identify that race still matters. And so racism race was a social construct. It was constructed because of social, cultural, political, and economic necessity. Someone's inherited physical characteristic mattered because of the systems that we built. And so to be a racist means that anyone in their words and their deeds would perpetuate what had been more than 400 years of history that is well documented. But to perpetuate that condition, to deny access and opportunity on the basis of inherited physical characteristic. So there has been privilege enjoyed because of race by some. There has been privilege enjoyed because of gender identity or gender expression or sexual orientation or physical ability. These things exist. And this council or this task force is seated to be very deliberate and intentional to identify the places and occupations and spaces and things that we do as humans in our lives in the community, whether we live, work, or play for the city of Kenmore. But this task force was seated out of the idea that build nothing for them without them. build nothing for a community of people without their voices. And so you're seated so that you can take what you've experienced, take what you've known, take what you've learned, and take what you heard, and act in the best interest of all people for the city of Kenmore. And so I wanted to make sure that we ground our conversation in that, because we have a very serious task ahead of us. And I believe that everybody, when they express a sincerely held belief, is entitled to that belief. But what we have to remember is that just because someone's entitled to their own belief doesn't mean that we're all entitled to our own set of facts. And we have to do the work that we do. And again, that's very serious work from the basis of what we know to be true. Our goal is not to marginalize anyone. Our goal is not to silence any voices. Our goal is not to remove someone from the table and not allow them to express a sincerely held belief. And so I want to make sure that we hear all voices, because what we do won't matter unless people get to say what it is that they say. But I want to make sure that we're grounded in the knowledge that the work that we're doing is to uplift and to remove barriers and to increase access and opportunity for everybody that presents themselves, that wants to be a part of, and that is a part of Kenmore's community, both now and in the future. So with that, did anybody else have anything that they wanted to add to that
I
conversation?
wanted to ask a question, if I could. This is Lily.
Yes.
So Mr. Peoples has come to us for the second time to talk about this link we have in the diversity, equity, and inclusion subpage of the Kenmore City website.
Mhm.
And it's under additional resources, but I'm honestly wondering myself why it's in there. Do you mean, Shannon, that we want to keep it in there so anybody who goes by this diagram or believes in it feels represented? Or why is it in there?
Well, first, I didn't put it there, but I know that it's there. I've seen it and I know the information that's there. It's there with a lot of other tools, information, and resources. But the point of it, in my opinion, and having talked about it with others with the city, is that it exists as a resource to educate, to inform, and to ensure that knowing the past and knowing how the past informs our current reality, we are not doomed to repeat mistakes of the past because we don't know.
I completely understand if that's what you heard it, but going into this resources and finding this is kind of disturbing. You know, put an explanation in there that states that, because I can see Mr. Peoples' point, and he has come to us like we don't have the authority to take it off, and I don't think we would want to impose that. But I'm honestly looking at this and thinking, like, what is the message? What kind of resources is it providing to the community?
Mm-hmm.
And it might be a question for the city. And Shannon, sorry, if you can be the bridge, please, or if Leonora, I don't get this document at all. Why it's in there?
So that was actually part of the research that one of our interns did. It was part of the findings and documents that were uploaded onto our DEI page. And so taking into consideration DEI, we were capturing all perspectives. And sometimes, you know, when you do talk about DEI issues, it is a hard topic to talk about.
Yeah.
Right. Perhaps a middle ground would be to just add some context here, because you put this as a resource in a way that can mean, I'm not saying it does, but for someone reading, if someone gives me a resource, that's something they want me to refer to and use. If you don't tell me how, I can take offense of this, like Mr. Peoples.
Well, I guess if I may speak,
Go ahead.
I was curious when the subject was brought up, so I researched it some and I read through it, and I don't find any objections to it. Actually, I think that everything in there is self-explanatory, and if somebody takes offense to it, it'd be good that they explain it, because I just see points of fact. Each of those points in the pyramid are easily proven and have been proven. And one thing tends to lead to the other. So when you look at the top of the pyramid, there's genocide, and there's certainly been genocide committed against many communities that are different than ours because of the previous things that escalate and eventually end in the genocide and exclusion of these subgroups of people. So just because somebody's offended by it and they have their own opinion of it doesn't mean that that's that this is an offensive slide. And that is, again, humbly my opinion.
Yeah, I can see that, but to me, it's a little bit out of context. You know, is it a resource or just a reference? You know, is it something for people to think about, or I don't know. I looked at it and I wasn't clear what the goal of having this labeled as a resource.
And well, I'm not going to speak. I'm going to let Nancy speak, and then we'll go to Juliana. Go ahead, Nancy.
I am just so grateful for the gift of this conversation and just thought around this. And I think what I'm hearing is not mutually exclusive, that what Lily suggested too, and I also want to throw my vote behind this, is a little bit of a conversation starter or just context setting for these resources. I love the idea of maybe this is something that helps begin a conversation. I don't know if that's a recommendation the DEI task force can recommend. The city just maybe explore ideas of what are ways that the community can deepen their understanding of what is DEI work, and with the understanding that there are folks who do this work day in, day out. You are a consultant, you are an expert at this. And there are folks that are at the beginning of this journey who may care to journey on, but without that context, without some guidance, I can also see that it's like, what do I do with this? I don't understand where to even start. And so I love that. I mean, this is just such a gift of thinking of where everyone may be in our community. And like Bill said, I don't think it's offensive because it's fact. It helps lay it out. It's a tool, it's a resource, and combining what Lily says of helping give a little guidance and context and maybe a little explanation in that resources page, like how can we support community members who may come to these resources in a way that meets them where they're at. And we're not hiding, this is truth, this is history, this is what it was, and how can we help meet them where they're at in their journey. But again, just so grateful for the gift of this conversation that we're having.
And really, I think that what it shows is a causal relationship, because when you look at the insert, that's the box, it says in a pyramid, every brick depends on the ones below it for support. If the bricks at the bottom are removed, the whole structure comes tumbling down. And so at its base, it explains indifference in the trajectory in terms of the causal relationship. Well, what does that mean, or what does that sound like? And it has statements like politics doesn't affect me, avoiding confrontation with racist family members, remaining apolitical, not challenging racist jokes, two sides to every story. But my Black friend says it's just a joke, get over slavery. And then it moves into minimization. And what does that look like? We all belong to the human race. Tone policing, racist mascots, tokenism, bootstrap theory, cultural appropriation, and then veiled racism. What does that look like? Because then it starts to escalate. Victim blaming, funding schools locally, racial slurs, fearing people of color, redlining, anti-immigrant policy, stop and frisk, school to prison pipeline, discrimination, mass incarceration, swastikas, Confederate flags, burning crosses, the N-word, neo-Nazis, call for violence, police brutality, hate crimes, lynching, unjust police shootings, and then finally genocide, mass murder. So to what end? And so that is what the tool explains. It talks about the fact that, you know, one thing begets the other, but if you eliminate those things at the base, you have a better chance to eliminate what's at the tip. Bill, go ahead.
I just want to also add that sometimes in my life, ignorant of a trait that I have. And it takes somebody pointing it out and then great difficult introspection to realize that, yes, I do have a serious fault of thought, personality, or action or reaction, and that I have to change. And so when I see this pyramid, it gives me a lot of food for thought about all these concepts. And I can see how somebody may read it and think, oh my, that cannot be. But maybe they have to look in themselves and why are they reacting this way? And this is so objectionable to them, when to some of us it's pretty clear that this is how it happens, and we do have to change it if we're expecting to live in a better world.
Thank you. Juliana?
Hi, I'm loving this discussion. So last week when Mr. Peoples voiced his concern and I pulled this up, I think like some of the rest of you, I looked at this and I was like, oh, I've read this before. This is really important. You know, as a white person, sometimes it can be pretty like uncomfortable to go through and like hash this out, but this is really important work. And then I really appreciate Lily calling us to sit with us again. And I have, right now I'm looking at all of the other resources, and I really appreciate Lily's distinction between it being a reference versus a resource, because it does look like all of the other links that I also want to clarify, these are not actually, the links are on the Kenmore government page, but then there's a very distinct pop-up that says that you are being rerouted to an external page. So I do want to clarify, the white supremacy page is not actually on the Kenmore city government. It is an external link. But everything else is, I feel like, really scaffolds someone into the discussion. There's, you know, these long articles and interviews with people who are queer or LGBT, or there's videos or Q&A, and there's a lot of context on how to be anti-racist. And I definitely do feel kind of the jarring contrast between some of these other pages that are clearly like standalone, let me sit with you and educate you, versus this white supremacy page that's just, you know, it is very bold and just a single standalone page. So I'm curious, because I do think the white supremacy pyramid is important, but I'm wondering if it could be substituted with a different page that simply like outlines more of the context. If we're trying to be DEI and think about the people who are, you know, coming from all these different corners, is there a way that we could, you know, find more of an article or a video that has the same education, but maybe helps ease them into this conversation where they aren't so turned off at the beginning? Because I think some of these other resources are really beautiful at that. Shopping at Black-owned businesses, or, you know, what should you say to not be racist when asking about someone's, you know, I just wonder if we could have the same context presented in a more thorough resource.
My only pushback is this: to what end do you provide information where people will get uncomfortable with where we appease someone's discomfort in the topic, so that we ease people gently into a conversation about marginalization, that we ease people ever so gently into a conversation about racism, and that we ease people ever so gently into a conversation about the marginalization of women or queer folks or anyone else? Sometimes you have to jump into the deep end and have the conversation. And to quote Dr. King, you know, how many more centuries have to pass so that you stop having to ease people into a conversation and jump into the conversation? Go ahead, David.
There we go. Well, I think, you know, I'm enjoying the conversation, but I think this page has done its job. He's come twice. He's had to think about this. It's offended him. That's okay. You know, the majority can get offended from time to time. Minorities are offended all the time. So he's thinking about it. Maybe he looks through all these different actions that, okay, oh, I've done all these things in my life. I've looked at this and I said, you know, everyone's done some of these things, told off-color jokes. We're like, okay, that's part of this pyramid. I'll modify my behavior and be more cognizant of other people's, racial backgrounds, economic backgrounds. And that's fine. It's just making you a little more introspective and saying, okay, this is racist behavior. I've done some of it. Now I know what it is. I can modify my behavior in the future.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Well, we voiced our opinions, and it will go in the minutes, and the city can take a look and they can decide.
There you go.
So, Mr. Peoples, thank you, but that's what I feel I could do about this.
Let's see. So let's go back to the agenda. We wanted to talk also about community outreach and engagement. But before we do, Leonora and I wanted to engage the task force in a couple of different things. Number one, we wanted to talk about proposed changes to the meeting schedule. And then number two, we wanted to cover and have a conversation about outreach, about community engagement and the future of the task force. So as you know, when you all were seated on the task force, you were also told at the onset that this task force would be sunsetted because it exists for the purpose of this project. And you would be advising as a task force on this project with the end result or a deliverable of an equity policy for the city. As part of doing this work, we've had you on a cadence of schedules to meet every other week on Thursdays from 6 till 7:30. But right now we're about to engage in a community-wide survey that requires for us to market, requires outreach and engagement, distribution of the survey, both online and creating mechanisms for in-person delivery of the survey. And so in order to do that, that survey would launch for all of the month of May. So the last week of April and then into the first week of May, we would launch that survey, and it would conclude at the end of the month of May. That means that you wouldn't have anything to meet regarding or to weigh in on until we had more information prepared to present to you. And so while we get the rest of the qualitative and quantitative data to be able to present to you, we wanted to discuss with you the moving of a couple of different meetings, specifically the Thursday, May 5th and Thursday, May 19th. What we're proposing is that those meetings move to Thursday, June 9th and Thursday, June 23rd. So that would extend your tenure for an additional month with everything else remaining the same, so that we would have time to engage with the community deeply and meaningfully and bring you those insights back. That would allow for us to connect with more of the community so that you have more of the community weighing in on DEI specifically related topics. Part of that survey we'll collect is demographic. Part of the survey information we'll collect is demographic data, housing stock, gender, language at home, any disabilities, veteran status, and all of these different characteristics to identify members of the community. It is a voluntary survey. People don't have to participate, but they can, and there are questions that they can refuse to answer. But the hope and goal is that we can get those surveys to, number one, benchmark us against other communities and to look specifically at how people think or feel about DEI as a topic area and some of the things that they believe the council and the staff should be focusing on now and in the future. And that would help inform also our equity policy. So we wanted to be able to collect that information from a wide swath of the community and then bring those findings back to you so that you can use that in order to help in making your decisions and recommendations. Leonora, did I get all of that? Was that? At least for the dates. So I wanted to at least begin now to engage you in conversations regarding the extension of your tenure, first of all, so that you won't conclude at the end of May, but you'll conclude at the end of June. So how do you all feel about that, first of all? Okay, all right. And then are those dates okay with you, June 9th and 23rd? Okay, thank you. And then to the future of the task force. Now, some of you at previous meetings thought that it would be an incredible idea and a great value add for the city to continue to have a diversity, equity, and inclusion task force as an advisory body. So I wanted to have you open up your mics and raise your virtual hands and weigh in on that, because what we want to know is if you want to make a formal recommendation as part of your deliberations to move that recommendation to the city manager's office of the council for them to continue to consider seating a DEI task force as a permanent structure, a permanent fixture for the city of Kenmore. So I guess the question then is, what say you to that? So open up your mics and tell us what you think. Bill?
I say that I propose, make a motion that we open up a task force of this committee and then make it a permanent committee in the city council, at the city council's disposal, so that this issue continues to progress into the future. I don't think our job is finished at the end of June. I believe it's beginning at the end of June.
Aisha?
Hi, everyone. Great to see everyone. I agree with Bill. This is the beginning. You cannot just, gather people, get some information and say we're done. We're talking about impactful change, transcendence, that is change that is going to really change the landscape of, let's say, city of Kenmore 5-10 years from now, to really make it a much more equitable city and hopefully be an example. So this, quarter or whatever is not even, if it stops here, it's not doing anything. It's just lip service, in my opinion. So I do recommend a proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Juanita?
Yes, I think if anything, I think through our conversations that we've learned that it's very complicated. We've only just scratched the surface. To do more meaningful work and make it sustainable, this task force has to go on. And these conversations need to be continuing, and they need to be consistent. They need to be where it is right in front of us. As us as a community, to open doors for other people, modes of communication, for a trusted body too, that is seen to somebody as more advocacy for maybe having exchanges where it's more trust. We're more of a trustworthy body. We're not going to in any way judge. We're here to listen, to help advocate for those who need that. And I think we need more of this on a consistent basis, and because it's also that trust thing. I think, we're here and then you just disappear. That can be more of a risky behavior than to be here and to be consistent for people.
Thank you. David?
Yes, I think the task force needs to continue. Our job is to make this policy for the city. But if we don't have the continuation of the task force, we're not in the mindset of the city council or the city staff itself. I'm just saying, we have this task force that just help spur the changes within the city of Kenmore itself. We'll have for example, last week we talked about the missing middle. We can have a greater voice in new zoning for the entire city, and it can be a transformative experience for the entire city. We can be an example for the entire state. We can make this a mecca for a diverse city within the greater Puget Sound, and we can really bring some renewed vibrance to this area of our community.
Thank you. Peggy?
Thank you. So I think the task force should continue on, but it needs some tweaks. So right now we talk, and the only people that hear our voices are each other. And if we're really going to be impactful, I think perhaps we need to have a little more time with the city council, or to have events with the community so that people understand what we're trying to do and get more into the community that we're trying to impact. Perhaps we can be the outreach in some ways that we're going to discuss here shortly. So, I think that the task force should continue, but it needs to be much broader than what we're talking about here with this group only.
Thank you, Peggy. And then remember, this group will sunset, and you could have a DEI commission, a DEI board that could exist in the way that you all help to contribute to talk about, what that structure should look like. And I think that you're spot on, Peggy, to talk more about engaging with the council and engaging with the community, maybe having town halls or helping be part of, those folks that are the ambassadors for the city.
Yeah, or focus groups or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Thank you. Lily.
Yeah, I agree with Peggy 100%. I think it's time for us to interact with the city. I appreciate the bridge you have provided from both sides, Shannon. And I think it would be productive to both sides to have more of a dialogue and explore those topics a little further. And to someone else's point that this is just the beginning, I agree, because the policy will only tell them like the guiding principle and the what, right? And now that they will need to work on the how do you transform the policy and procedures, actions, programs, and such, there's no way they cannot have us, for it to be complete. So I would be happy to continue on for as long as it's needed.
Thank you. So Bill has recommended, and all of you have recommended, that the task force should continue. So now you are officially on the record, and we've even got some ideas of what that should look like in the future. So thank you so much for that. And then next, we wanted to talk about outreach and engagement, what that looks like with the community. So that thing that you're talking about doing and continuing to do. So when it comes to the outreach and engagement to connect with the community, one of the ways that we have created the bridge for the community to have conversations and participate in what we discuss is to make the information available right away, that the data and information that we're going to talk about on the website. We publish the dates. This is an open and public meeting that anybody could come and listen and to be able to weigh in. So we have public comment in the beginning at every meeting, so that at the end of this conversation, people at the front end of the next conversation will be able to weigh in on what we said and even look at the documents in the same time that they're made available to you. Part of, again, what we want to do is connect with the community through the survey. What other ideas do you all have in terms of engaging, connecting with the community? We would have done for other cities, what we've done is focus groups, but focus groups were not on the table for the city of Kenmore because you have a series of 6 meetings where public comment is available and people can come and participate in the conversation. They have the documents in real time to be able to weigh in, but we're also doing a survey. Are there organizations that you think that are important that we connect to? Are there other methodologies for engaging that you think we should consider? The survey will be in other languages. It'll be both online and shared with community partners, nonprofits, shelters, and other folks so that they may be able to assist in making sure that we can gather feedback. It'll be presented with a QR code at events. It will be sent out in the newsletter and on the social media channels, very likely postcards going to not specific residences, but postcards that are unaddressed, because then they can go to every door across the city of Kenmore. Do you have any other ideas with regard to things that you think we may be able to do to expand that reach going into the month of May?
This is Nancy. Just to clarify, so this is to feedback on additional approaches outside of the ones you just listed to get the survey out to folks, to invite them to take the survey.
Yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure. One strategy that I've used before, and maybe this is included already in your engagement plan or public involvement plan, are partnering with CBOs with their networks. So that may include translated materials for the survey. I'm not sure if that's in the budget. Compensation plans and structure in terms of if there's an organization, if you're building a relationship with a person from a particular community-based organization. Sometimes we have tiers, so maybe they're able to share a social media post that we can draft, and then they can just either reshare or post on their networks. Maybe an additional tier is that, and sending out something if they've got a regular newsletter. But a strategy that I've used before in terms of community engagement is building those real relationships with different CBOs and representatives from community-based organizations, and thinking about the compensation strategy as well, as they're providing a really valuable service to their networks to try and get that. I know we've talked about trust and relationship building, but in addition to all the tactics you've listed of mailers and online, maybe this is another avenue of this information invitation to take a survey coming from someone that people are already familiar with.
Very good. Thank you. Anyone else?
I wondered if we could make it, how do I put it? Prior times that I've received communication in the mail, it's pretty settled, you know, you may read it, you may not. What if there was a little bit more enthusiasm and more movement and activity about it? I don't know, thoughts that come to mind is even like outreach into segments of the community that perhaps will have a language barrier. In volunteers could go in and explain what the survey is about. It reminds me even of Girl Scouts, you know, at Safeway promoting it. If we're going to really want to get those answers, maybe we need to try something different.
And we're, you know, one of the things that limits us is, you know, resource. It's one thing to try and find volunteers to do that, but you know, absence having volunteers, a lot of other methods to get information like this out, you know, cost a resource. Even to get those postcards out, several $1,000s to get the postcards out. And you know, the city of Kenmore is small, the budget is small, and so you know, we're trying to think of the biggest bang sometimes for the smallest buck. But I you know, I love the idea to target. The survey will be translated in the most populous languages for the city of Kenmore, so that will happen. So it'll be available in multiple languages. So when you click on the survey link, you get to choose the language, and the questions and options to respond will be in the language of folks' choosing. And we do have an outreach and engagement coordinator that's working with the communications team and others with the city of Kenmore to make phone calls to community-based organizations, to identify other organizations not known to the city, both individuals and organizations. So we've got folks making phone calls, sending emails. And then we also talked today about the fact that community events in the city are starting again for city employees that will be attending, and they'll be sponsoring. And so we'll have tables and information in the month of May set up to be able to share information there as well. But I especially love the idea to work with community partners and have them sharing on their social media channels and in their with their networks this survey.
Yeah, and it could be a way for the city to try the volunteering out. I happen to have been in the Women's Month picture day at the city, and we spoke briefly about volunteering, and from my understanding, the only opportunities out there so far have been to do like events in the summer and such. So it could be a way to, you know, take the temperature, what kind of help the city could get from volunteers for a specific project.
Thank you. David?
Has the city thought about posting the QR codes at all the local businesses that people would frequent, restaurants, dry cleaners, tap room,
Yeah.
all those spots, they could just, have something up there and say, hey, have you taken the survey yet? Something like that. That might be effective.
Posters with a QR code, and
Yes.
that was something, that is something that came to mind. Leonora, we would be looking for your cost center for those colored glossy posters. We talked about specifically, David, partnering with the Kenmore Bothell Chamber of Commerce and trying to leverage them and their network to get the word out. So, if we did that and had those colored glossies, we would be able to leverage the Chamber of Commerce to make sure that we got those out and into the hands of business so that they can have that those posted.
All right. Excellent.
Good. Peggy?
I'm curious to know if we've done an environmental scan of minority-owned businesses in Kenmore. And I've heard the suggestion to look for volunteers, like specific individuals, but maybe we can try to go through businesses and explain why we're doing this. And if those are minority-owned businesses, for example, their clientele may also be, maybe more underrepresented people going there. I worry that when you go to like a Safeway or a tap room or something like that, the people that will respond are primarily going to be white.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point, Peggy. And part of our deliberate outreach and engagement is to go to those folks that are underrepresented. For the reason that you have articulated. So we're pushing this out to everybody, but we're especially looking to those folks who sometimes get lost in the shuffle. Juliana?
Just piggybacking off of Peggy's comment. I know Kenmore has multiple like food banks and churches that do food distribution and free like Sunday dinners, or even putting some of those glossy flyers. Kenmore has like 3 different, I don't know if we can advertise, but like the free food pantries and things. Again, I know you said you want to do outreach to shelters, but I'm also just thinking of like the people right on the cusp that I would really love to make sure their voices are amplified too.
And if you all have any ideas of an organization, even if we know it, don't assume that we know it. Make sure that you send that information, any resource information, any contact information to Leonora. And we will certainly put them on the list and do outreach and get them every bit of information and that we have to help and partner and collaborate with us. Juanita?
I just have our schools in this partnering with the schools, sending home information with the kids. Is that has that been discussed?
We've done outreach to North Shore Schools Equity Office, and so we'll be sending information and sharing with them as well.
Okay, so that can go out. What about like I know you said like the activities. What about the parks? We have a good park system here, and what about going to the parks? And I know that takes volunteers. I have a nephew of mine has asked for a chance to volunteer. As that, I mean, I know it's coming up soon. I know that. So if there is anything like at a park or an event there that we can that can help, maybe even starting an event like to help inclusion process, having a park walk to see if populations feel like they're being represented, the accessibility to the parks, if that's if they like that, if the art is there, that is misrepresentation of what they think is them, or there's not representation at all for them, because I know art in the community is really important for expression and representation and telling stories. So maybe that can be, I know this is coming up soon, but that would be, I would really like to see a walk in the park, something like that, that could help us also talk about representation and inclusion.
Yeah. And, maybe even in the short time span, maybe the stopgap is that if we can create that resource, maybe that larger color glossy with the QR code for folks, that if people, want to volunteer, we can maybe have a volunteer packet or a volunteer kit so that when they go out to the events where they go, then they might be able to open that up and set up a table or hold it up or post it and encourage people to kind of scan it on their way in or out or while they're enjoying some activity, and to be able to take advantage of that as well. Thank you for that idea, Juanita. It's a great idea. Peggy?
I'm just riffing on the idea, what you said, if you know of any businesses to send them in. But I was thinking that actually, I think Kenmore, when you have a business in Kenmore, don't you need to apply for a business license?
Oh, yeah.
And that business license probably indicates if you're a minority owned, women owned business, et cetera. It might actually be easier to just pull records.
Yeah, we talked about that as well. So we looked at those folks who are registered in the city of Kenmore as any kind of an organization. And then we also talked about connecting with those businesses that were part of the Chamber of Commerce. So, because not everybody that's registered is a member of the Chamber of Commerce, but we wanted to be able to tackle both ends. And the folks that are most engaged are the ones who generally do participate with the Chamber, but the ones that aren't, that are just registered for the city, we talked about sending it to the distribution lists of all of those.
Perfect, thank you.
Bill.
Hi again. I used to canvass neighborhoods for political campaigns. And I don't know if we have this demographic data, but political campaigns would target the likely electors by zip code, by area, by neighborhood, by street, by address. And then we would visit those houses. And I don't know if that database is available for Kenmore for the populations that we want to target. And if those lists could be made available, of course, anonymous, no names, just general areas. Then maybe we can organize an ad hoc group of volunteers that can go house to house and knock on doors and, meet neighbors and pass the information on. That's very effective because you're shaking hands, you're sharing stories about your children. It's very charming and effective.
Yeah. It's too bad that this doesn't coincide with the neighborhood night out.
Precisely, yeah.
And nice weather.
I was wondering too, if the city can organize a World Day each year, just like they have other festivals that are celebrated, like a Kenmore World Day where you celebrate all cultures, all peoples, ethnic foods and fun things to do and music, that kind of thing.
Okay. And then let's shift now. Before I do, Leonora, was there anything else that you want to add to that? Okay. Yeah, no?
No, just a lot of really great ideas. So thanks for sharing.
Oh, go ahead, Peggy. Your hands up.
Hey, Bill, you had me at food. Such a good that.
You should try my wife rice and beans. Pretty good stuff.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Don't threaten us with a good time and good food.
Yes.
Now, I wanted to circle back and visit a little bit because I know Rob Carlinzi, he's going to say, wow, so they had the idea that the task force should continue. And that was a question that he had as well. And then he's going to say, what does, correct me if I'm wrong, Leonora, but I know that Rob's next question, the city manager for Kenmore, is going to be, well, what should that look like? Did they have any ideas of what that should look like? And we've got about half an hour of conversation left. And I know that some of you said it's got to look different than it looks now. And I wanted to engage in just a little bit of conversation, just so that we can have something recorded, so that because he's going to go back and listen to the meeting. But council members listen to the meeting, folks in the community go back and request the transcript, or at least the recording of the meeting. And I want for them to hear from your own mouths what you think that should look like. So I know that you've said that that you wanted to engage with the community more. Now, not every board and commission for the city has their meetings that are public meetings. Your meetings are public meetings right now. In your new iteration, do you think that the new iteration of meetings should also continue to be public meetings? So let's have that conversation. And let me even say, even in terms of context, you had a member of this task force that stepped away from the task force because of the public component and the very real for them, the possibility of emotional harm, emotional trauma, born of, of confrontations that could happen in this space because you invite the public to participate. And there's pros and cons to that. But you all wanted to connect directly with the community, have the community engage in these conversations. And then, in a different iteration, you don't have to function in the same way that a council would, where you have public comments separate. You could, let people engage with you and have conversation back and forth throughout the meeting. It could look like anything. So let's first talk about, what kind of platform you think this should look like to move forward. Public meeting or not a public meeting? And that doesn't mean, let me also say quickly, even if even if every meeting is not a public meeting, it doesn't mean that you can't host sometimes a public meeting.
I honestly think if possible that we don't necessarily label or limit the platform. I completely picture us being tapped in to join, a non-public meeting or to opine on a piece of communication via email, or perhaps one of us is, of a particular heritage or has a particular skill set or experience that they want to tap on. My thought is more to have a platform to be available in to whatever need might come up.
And as you all know, the limits of a public meeting mean that you all can't be emailing back and forth. You can't, have the side conversations and meet and discuss issues with small groups of you. A committee can do something like that, but a group that exists that are subject to public meetings rules, you already know from the training that you did what the limitations of that means. Go ahead, Juanita.
Oh, I would like to maybe, not be as much public. I feel the same way. Sometimes I feel like, I know we are here to do a job, but sometimes that job, I feel I could do some of this on my own. Like I really love how our conversations are, you're telling us, you're basically doing like a lecture format, and then we come in and have that discussion. I do love that. But in the future, for the next iteration, I love that you say iteration. That's because I feel like that it should be, you do one thing, you get feedback, you do the next iteration based on that feedback. So it's like a feedback loop. And over the iterations, I do feel that some of this stuff has been where, okay, I could spend a lot more time on this, but we go on to the next subject so fast that I've done some research, and I feel that I would like to do some public and then some get together and not so public, because I feel that sometimes our ideas might be hindered a little bit when we don't have as much time during these meetings, or we're in the public. So I do think that we should do maybe a combination, but I also think that more time needs to be given. I guess I could spend more time. I guess reflections, I think would be in the iteration, maybe having reflections of how this meeting went, and how we feel about what we learned, and I think that's also when the community gets their surveys. I think with that input, going back over and talking to the public about how that went for them, what would they like to see different, how that experience, what they learned from that experience, how they like the outreach, what would they change. So I think that feedback loop needs to be involved too. And consistent, I think this task force will help that happen, because it's like, I used to be in healthcare, and continuity of care was always the issue with patients. So I think continuity of this task force of DEI, I think that for the health of the DEI for this community, that it needs to be continued, and whatever that may look like, it's going to be different, I guess, for each group. But for me, I could do some research and have everybody look at that, so anyway, that's what I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nancy?
I also agree with kind of what Juanita said, and I'm not sure what formal mechanism that looks like, but in terms of having more public and then just spaces for us to really engage in conversation. When this question came up about continuing the task force, my mind went more quickly towards the influence, the power, like what influence does this task force have in terms of engagement with the council members, or just that structure. And I think several people talked about the structure of making that clear for folks who may want to join the task force or continue working on the task force, and just kind of hammering out those details of even frequency of meetings, but also like the power that the task force may hold as well in terms of specific either conversations or analysis of gaps. I know for our particular task force, you were clear in terms of these are, what our end goal is, what we're producing as a deliverable. We're looking at these documentations, we're giving this kind of feedback. And so I think a continuation of a task force, having that conversation ahead of time in terms of what does that really look like? And I think I've heard that echo from other folks as well, would be really important. What I think I'm also hearing and would suggest too would be really lovely if we have the time is to debrief from our experiences as the inaugural task force, lessons learned, what to move forward, where are growth edges, where are we dreaming and hoping for a future task force. And then I also loved that kind of accountability, transparency piece. I thought I was hearing from Juanita too, in terms of for this future task force, if it's ongoing, whatever mechanism we're existing as, like what is that feedback loop to the community? How are we transparent? Is that like, just the minutes from our meetings? Is that a brief summary, conversations in the community? So I think those are a couple of like maybe more of the logistics questions that I was thinking of when we had this conversation about the DEI task force continuing. And I mean, do you think it's a wonderful idea? And I think my brain just quickly goes to, all right, well, what does that look like in implementation and logistics and operationalizing it?
I also wanted to mention, I know it was mentioned earlier about potentially having meetings, but I'd like to actually cue Anastasia and our clerk, if she could please add the limitations or the requirements or share information on that about public meetings.
Sure. Hey, nice to see everyone again. So as you know, well, maybe you don't remember, but you don't need to store this in your cognitive space. When you have a formal meeting, you are acting as an extension of the city council as sort of like a sub-legislative body. And what that means that we have to adhere to the Open Public Meetings Act and the Open Public Records Act. So not only that, it means that we have to have a quorum every time we meet so that we can meet. So for a body of 14 task members, that means that 7 of you have to be present in order for the meeting to even continue. OPMA means Open Public Meetings Act. All of our meetings are open to the public. We don't have any side chatter in small committees. Everything is very transparent. Minutes are formally produced, and you have a formal host that helps navigate the meetings in the background for logistic purposes. And then Open Public Records Act means that anything spoken here, any email communication is a formal record, and it's an informational asset that the city holds on to and stewards. And if anybody files a public records request and says, hey, I'm really curious about what Mr. Castro may have sent to Chan and Kelly Ray over the last 3 months, that's public record, and we're going to produce that. So on the positive, it's very forward facing. On the negative, it's kind of restrictive. Because as you know, a lot of the conversations you have in the committee or community are organic and they're raw and they happen in real time. You can't confine them to a Thursday night where you hope and cross your fingers that people that fit the people you want to talk to show up. So one distinction to consider is a formal meeting is one that ultimately, or a formal committee is one that ultimately answers to the city council. A slightly informal meeting can answer to a staff liaison and be more casually set up, right? So kind of like a focus group, or, well, just a committee, a subcommittee, and not so much as a formal task force. And you still interface just as much with the public. You just have more options on how to do that. You can interface with the staff, but it's the staff that relay formal recommendations to the council instead of you having to kind of be that primary person. So that's one way to look at it. And I don't know if you've been following what the city council is doing, but a really great example of how these committees work is we have a local coalition called People for an Environmentally Responsible Kenmore, PERC. And that's a really fantastic example of how that coalition came alongside the city and worked in tandem with city staff to talk about the Cadman asphalt plant. So they were able to host a committee meeting with both city staff and committee members, but they weren't bogged down by a lot of the legislative and legal requirements. So those are just some things to consider, and both have wide benefits. But keep in mind, if we keep this as a formal committee, we will be really strict with making sure that we're legally very transparent.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Anastasia. And
Okay.
again, you can exist as a committee and still interface with council, and you can still interface with the community. But if Juanita and Bill and Juliana and David and Aisha got together and had a conversation and said, well, let's talk about this thing on the website. Let's talk about this, outreach thing and volunteering, and let's just get together and figure out something, and then we'll take it to the rest of the group, and then we can invite we can see if the city will partner with us, and we can host a listening session or host an event, and it could be in person or virtual. So you don't have all of those same restrictive rules. So it's kind of the best of both worlds, I would probably say.
It was sobering when you brought up the fact that one of our members has left because of concerns. It hit home because my wife just asked me yesterday if I was sure I want to stay on the committee, since sadly in our country, people have been threatened in boards and committees, and I told her, no, I'm not afraid, I'm committed. But being my wife and everything happens to me affects her and my children, I had to sit down for a while and think about it. And but I think the cost is worthy, and it's for that same wife and those same children that the task has to continue for me. That would be my path. But maybe these recommendations about a subcommittee would be very beneficial to expand the labor that we can perform, and then maybe result in more volunteering, more action in the direct action in the community, and help the city prosper.
And that's the trade-off. That's the thing that you inherit, is the ability to have more direct action.
Mm-hmm. It's good to have those choices.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Lily, were you going to say something?
I was just curious, is there any disadvantage of being a subcommittee? Because it sounds like a potential good fit.
I don't think so, because ultimately, this is where the point and what the power is with a group like this. No matter what form you take, you're still only empowered to give city staff, city leaders, or the city council advice that they're not compelled to have to take.
Mm-hmm.
So what you say today or what you say in another form, those elected leaders have the option to exercise their own decision. So
Right.
offer your wisdom in an advisory capacity to give them something more to think about, or to give them a perspective maybe they haven't seen or they don't know. You're like the Jiminy Cricket on Pinocchio's shoulder. And you know, the difference so in terms of influence, you know, your influence doesn't change. You were born of the council. They want to know what you say. So no matter what shape you take, you'll still have that. You'll still have that relationship with council. We had a council member that was watching the meeting for a little while here, because they're interested in what you say.
Right.
And but
I have to say, Shannon, when I met folks at the city, I felt like they also didn't know how much they could talk with me, you know? So maybe we break that. Just you guys tell us which would be the most, you know, flexible option.
I'll tell you this. You will probably have more access. Your access to staff will probably be more relaxed. Staff talking to you will probably be more relaxed. You being able to go to the coffee shop as a group and not have to worry about setting up the whole infrastructure, you'll be able to go and be able to do that. Your reach in the community will be very different. It'll be very relaxed.
That sounds good to me and appealing, because I'm not in part of the government, and I want to continue to be unbiased, unrelated, you know, like that's the beauty of it too. They don't have to do what we tell them, but we can tell them pretty much whatever we feel like it needs to be heard. And that independence to continue, perhaps not having to be recorded and, you know, memorize in a minute, that might give us a little bit more flexibility on our side too.
And Mr. Peoples invited you to the possibility of sitting down and having a conversation, you all. And you'd be able to do that with him and a whole bunch of other people in the community, to sit down and have that direct conversation without the whole infrastructure. Because right now he's behind a wall, he's observing, but he's still behind a wall.
Right.
This would take him from behind the wall, so that now then you can have a conversation that is very different, where the dynamic and the accessibility to the conversation is very different. It wouldn't be public comment. It would, with 2 minutes, it would be, let's sit down and have a conversation.
Right.
Okay. Well, something to think about. Leonora?
Do you think we'll continue in the next reiteration? Do you have any thoughts? Will there be a way to volunteer ahead of time to remain, or?
I think that what we'll likely end up doing is, when your tenure is over as members of this task force, when it's sunsetted in the way that it was originally designed by the council, what we'll likely do is have all of you come together after you're done, probably in the week or two after you're done. Well, probably not the next week, because you'll be gone for the 4th of July, but probably the second week of July, to do just that, to debrief, to talk about your experiences, what you loved and what you thought represented an opportunity to do something different. And then to really kind of probably work with you to offer recommendations in terms of structure so that you can send it to the city manager's office and you could become a committee of, concerned citizens that, serve at the pleasure of the city manager's office, and you are his trusted advisors. And you engage with the Kenmore community on his behalf to bring voices to the table, do outreach to the community, and bring him perspectives that are not known to him, or create space for the community to have conversations and to do those things. So we'll likely sit down with you to have a conversation, either virtually or in person, to talk about what that looks like, talk about stipends or not stipends and what the city's resources are. And the city can send staff over to tell you, what their options are and what's possible and what they might be able to advance for council consideration. And maybe we'll ask for Karina and other council members, maybe one or two of them to come, because we can't have them be a quorum, because all of a sudden, then they're a public meeting. So you see how that's tough, that even for the council to come and sit down with you, if you have too many of them in a room, then all of a sudden it's a quorum in a public meeting. So, because they're always going to be hamstrung by that one. But yeah, so that is in all likelihood what's going to be happening. Juanita?
Exciting.
Yes, I was just thinking about, because I know it takes a lot of resources. Has there been grants available for this type of work that the city can apply for?
I'm sure that there must be, but none that we've researched right now.
Okay.
Leonora, was there anything else that we wanted to make sure that we covered? So I know we covered the changing of the dates, and those are good. So we're going to send the updates out. We'll make sure that we work with with Nancy and Anastasia to make sure that we get the meeting bridges reissued, get the dates published and put on the website, and make sure that we have everything canceled for the May 5th and 19th and have it rescheduled for the 9th and 23rd. So we'll do that right away so that the public will be made aware of that shift and change so that they're able to attend those meetings. We'll also make sure that we talk to the city manager next week when he's back about the fact that the task force feels strongly that the task force should continue in another iteration, and we'll get together after your tenure to debrief and to offer a recommendation to his office with regard to what you think that next iteration should look like. And then we've also got some really great notes on engagement ideas, communities to approach and how to approach as well. Leonora, was there anything else that you wanted to make sure that we put in front of this task force today?
I think you covered it all. Everything's covered.
Is there anything else that you folks wanted to bring forward? You wanted to talk about, you wanted us to consider, or you want to have us address? Anything that you wanted to share with the community for the good of the order?
It is a lovely community and it's going to get lovelier.
Yeah. And, I want to, Aisha.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes. I wanted to say that what we're doing, we have the privilege of being here and trying to make change. I think it's important for us to really think about the people that don't have access to social media. People don't have time to really sit down, open their mail and say, yes, I want to do this, because they don't see themselves in that survey, because they will say, well, I can fill this out, nothing's going to happen. It's the same way with the census, right? Some people don't want to fill out the census because either they are, lack of documentation and scared and so forth. So I think with this, so even though there are lack of resources, it needs to be much more targeted to people that need the resources the most, that the change is going to impact the most. That way, just people like me and all of us on this panel we get up, we can find anything online. It's very accessible and so forth. We open the mail, we know what it is, we're not scared. So I think we really need to keep those people foremost in our thoughts when we're doing this. Thank you.
That's very important, Aisha. Thank you so much for that constant reminder. I think it's important to call that out every time.
Yeah, and can I say something else?
Yes.
Yes. So in my other life, I work with women that do farming in sub-Saharan Africa. And that life has shown me that we need to make sure we pay attention to the people that don't have formal education, that don't have time to go and access services because they're trying to put food on the table for family members and send kids to school. So I just that's where this statement is coming from. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Leonora, I will pass it back to you.
You. Task Force members, thank you so much for your comments and your contributions today. As you can see, like I always say, we have a ways to go, and that's why we need you on this task force. Thank you very much. Have a good evening, and meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.